Hello and welcome to Dojo Live this Wednesday, March 8th, 2023. My name is Kim Lantis. It's my pleasure to be joining you today along with my co-host, America Guerrero.
Hello, everybody. Happy Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday and International Women's Day. So it's exciting. It's exciting to be here and to celebrate all of the amazing women that have gone before us, who currently are here trailblazing, like our guest, Eden Full Goh, who is the founder and CEO of Mobot. Eden, thank you so much for joining us today on Dojo Live.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
It is exciting. I think today's going to be a really great conversation, something that we don't get to talk about too much on the show, and it's actually robotics and how that is impacting software development. But before we get to the specifics of today's show and Mobot itself, we'd first like to get to know you, Eden, your story, your kind of passion, and what's led up to the founding of Mobot. Thank you.
Yeah. So I was born and raised in Calgary, Canada. I started my career studying mechanical engineering and computer science in college. Then I actually received a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to drop out of college and pursue a Teal Fellowship. And this was over a decade ago. And so what was the premise of the program at the time, and it still remains today, is that they basically allow students, around the age of 20 or slightly younger to drop out of college and pursue a project or a startup or a nonprofit, a company that they're passionate about. And so a decade ago, I got this opportunity to basically drop out of college, start a nonprofit. And that was my first exposure to being a founder. Wow. I deployed a solar panel tracking system in different countries that I had developed and ran that organization for a few years. And then I went to go work in tech. It was more my experiences working in tech as a product manager were ultimately what inspired me to start Mobot. And I'm certainly happy to kind of go through all the details. But the long story short is my background has kind of been a mixture of both hardware and software, product development, cross different industries, cross different sectors. And that's kind of what I love to do. Is ultimately, I love solving problems. It's sometimes with software, sometimes with hardware, but you have to use the right tool for the right job.
Right. It's a really great story. And I love that you showed it because we find this is a really common commonality here on Dojo Live with a lot of leaders. It's their own personal problems that they've experienced that actually lead up to the inspiration of what they're currently doing. And that's amazing. So let's talk about Mobot as a project manager. What are you? Who are you? And what's the problem that you're solving?
Yeah. So when I first started my career working as a product manager, I worked at a company called Palantir. And so they were basically building all sorts of web applications that were taking Palantir's data analytics backend and hooking it up to web apps. And with these web apps, you could access them in the browser. Engineers made it really easy to write automated tests. And so you could run your test and make sure it worked in Firefox, Chrome, Safari, all of that. When I transitioned into a role at a company called Butterfly Network, it was a medical device company. And basically, instead of just this beautiful world of web where things just kind of run in the cloud and you have these automated tests that you can run and execute before you deploy a new version of that web app to a customer, with mobile, I basically literally had to get out my phone and I'd have to tap on the screen and actually make sure that everything worked successfully end to end. And because there was this medical device that was involved, I actually had to go through and plug in the medical device, test the mobile app, make sure that the correct firmware and the correct hardware and the cloud API that was connected to the mobile app were all aligned and were all ready for testing. And there were so many times where I would finish all my tests and then an engineer would be like, oh, I changed this a little bit. Can you please test it again? And then it would be this repetitive process over and over of testing. And then sometimes when you take shortcuts and you're like, oh, I don't need to test it again. I just tested it. This is a small change, right? And that's what happens where bugs might actually slip into production. And that has a real world impact on customers because it was a medical device at the time, doctors, patients, all of that. And so I was just doing a lot of this manual testing over and over again. And it became such a pain point for me because at some point, late at night, I'd have this iPhone, I'd have an Android device, I'd have an iPad, I'd have this Android tablet. And I was literally going down the line, like almost like assembly line style, and just like tapping using my fingers. And I ultimately got the idea for Mobot because I was like, oh, well, if I can actually test, physically, and it's very predictable. It's the same test over and over again. How can I actually automate this mechanically? Because I tried to actually approach engineers and I would ask them questions like, hey, can you just write some code and simulate this test? And they would give me a list of reasons of, we can do certain things with code and simulate testing, but there are certain things that you cannot actually simulate with code. It requires a real internet connection, the real camera, real Bluetooth connectivity, connecting to the USB port of that device. There's a lot of complexity, especially if you have two devices talking to each other or you're connecting to a smartwatch. You have a phone call interruption, you have a push notification. There are a lot of things where the broader trend here is the way that humans are using software, especially mobile software, is increasingly complex, increasingly physical. And so this sort of perfect in a vacuum software simulation test that you would write as an engineer is no longer really acceptable, and it doesn't represent real world testing. We're not here to say that you don't need to write simulated tests anymore, but in this world, in the next 3 to 5 to 10 years, testing is getting so complex that there needs to be additional tools and opportunities to solve that problem.
That's interesting. It actually goes against, I guess, my own logic or counterintuitive to what I would have guessed, right? My guess would be things become more and more automated. And to hear you, arguing from your own experience, say that no, the manual component, the real world component, the hands-on component is actually not going anywhere, is actually quite surprising to me. So that's great. And I think it's a really good transition into what we've chosen for today's topic.
Yes, so the topic is the growing role of physical testing and robotics in software development. As mobile applications are becoming increasingly device dependent across fragmenting hardware platforms, how are novel approaches in robotics changing the way companies build and test software? So please share with us the answer of this question.
Yeah. And so going back to your earlier point, Kim, I would say it's not that automation I think automation will still play a core role, but you're right that it's the way we automate is different. Instead of automating in software, there are ways to automate mechanically. And there is a way to automate manual testing, essentially, because we have basically acknowledged that manual labor or physical tapping, physical test execution will continue to play a role. I say this is honestly analogous to a self-driving car, right? You have engineers who are building using computer vision, machine learning, AI. They are building cutting edge software that has to run on a real car. And there is a difference between the simulated test that you run, where you're driving a car in a simulation, versus actually putting that software in a real car, then you as a driver sitting in behind the wheel and driving that car on the road and making sure you encounter real world pedestrians, real cats or animals crossing the street, things like that. And I see that is actually analogous to the way that we are thinking about these fragmenting hardware platforms. It's just another complicated environment that you need to, as a software engineer, as a product engineer, you need to design and account for. Just when you're thinking about user adoption, you're thinking about the demographics of your users, the types of people who are going to be using this product in the real world. And so I think that's why that's so important, is that the world is changing. The way that we use software, hardware, it doesn't just have to be sitting down in the comfort of your home anymore. It's not about just like using it at your desk. You might be running from meeting to meeting. You might be doing a workout. You might be in a hospital with a real medical device. And that's why it's so important to actually make sure that we adapt product development and testing techniques to be in alignment with how the world is changing. And it's also the other complicating part of this is that testing it has to accommodate the evolving hardware platforms. Like there's Samsung, there's Google, there's LG, there's Motorola, there's Apple, there's all of these Huawei, Xiaomi, so many. And hardware is becoming easier to innovate and to build. And so more companies are building more platforms. And as consumers, we have more choices. And so that makes the testing dimension even more complicated, which I think introduces a great opportunity for Mobot. Is we want to be able to have users and consumers have all the choices and options that they want, but you want to still build a high quality product to support them.
For sure. So let's talk specifically about what Mobot does, how this functions in terms of your amazing mesh, right, of the hardware and the software component. What does this look like?
Yeah. So Mobot essentially, we're a 45-person company based in and around New York in here in the US. And what we are doing is we are building and operating our own mechanical robots to deliver QA testing as a service to our customers. Our customers are iOS and Android mobile engineering teams that are building native iOS and Android apps that get deployed to the App Store and Google Play. And you've probably experienced this as a consumer where you have a bunch of mobile apps on your phone and periodically you get prompted to upgrade that mobile app. It happens around, usually some companies are releasing once a week, every 2 weeks, once a month. And so every single time the code is changing, you need to retest your app on all the different phones, all the different use cases. And so a good, healthy software engineering team that's building for both the iOS and Android ecosystem probably has hundreds of different test case scenarios that they have to run through. And we're talking things like sign in with Apple, sign in with Google, check out with Apple Pay, receive a push notification when you get a new chat message, pan the map to make sure that the map is displaying your current location, making sure that you can enter your credit card information and check out with PayPal, or you can link your bank account using Stripe or Plaid. So there's a lot of complex use cases around different people's apps, different APIs, different SDKs. And so with all of that, software engineering teams, every single time they release code, have to retest. So there's a combination of automated tests that will usually run that are managed internally, but then there's this huge opportunity around manual testing that Mobot is helping to really augment and support. And so fundamentally, we're not here to replace manual testing. We just believe that there's an opportunity for humans to be used for telling robots what to do, building a testing strategy, figuring out what devices should be tested, and just like making sure that we're connecting back to customers and product managers and that there's a cross-functional conversation that's happening. That's the best use of human time. Humans are also good for exploratory testing and being creative and coming up with new opportunities. Humans are not good at doing the same thing over and over again. And so what really excites me as robotics and testing become easier in the physical world, and because Mobot is going to be providing more automation, is we are unlocking more job opportunities for people to be able to actually direct the work of robots. And I think that's really in this evolving conversation around AI and chat GPT and all of that, that's the next frontier.
Super cool. Super
Yeah,
fun.
I had a question about that. For example, with this exploring phase that you have with the robots to see the complex use cases, do you utilize AI to explore that, or just with the human power?
So the interesting thing about Mobot is with every single test that our robots are executing, we are collecting a lot of metadata. We're collecting timestamps, screenshots, device logs. We're also leaving our own comments. We're annotating these screenshots with data about what regions of the screen should be assessed, what text on the screen should be assessed. And so this is essentially allowing us to build a corpus for machine learning in the near future. And so AI, machine learning, generative opportunities are going to play a bigger and bigger role in Mobot, and also in just broader the QA industry in creating test cases, maintaining test cases. I'm very excited about the opportunities that this technology unlocks. And so I believe we're genuinely at the very beginning. Our company, we're also, an early stage startup. And so what we're doing right now is making sure that we build the right infrastructure, the right software architecture, the right data model that facilitates us to currently collect as much data as possible, so that when we have the opportunity to train a machine learning data set, we already are going to have millions of screenshots across 2, 3, 4 years of testing for different companies across thousands of tests, hundreds of thousands of tests. We're going to be able to call on all of that data to be able to actually use AI and machine learning when the time comes.
That's absolutely fantastic. I like how we're talking about the future, and I want to get there with another question. But before we do, I'd like to talk about the here and now. So what does this look like if I'm part of the software development team and I'm going to deploy Mobot? What can I expect? Because what I'm visualizing is I set up a station similar to what you were laying out earlier. I've got my iOS device, I've got my Android device, I have my tablet, I have my whatever. And then there's this little thing that kind of just goes down the line doing the same movement in each one. And if it's not functioning, does it throw me an error message, or what does this look like in terms of start to finish and setting it up, the actual process, the data and elements that I received afterward, retesting? I mean, what does this look like for me?
Yeah. So the nice thing about testing is it is something that can be done as long as you have the right device by anyone, anywhere in the world. And so what makes Mobot unique is we're not selling robots. We actually have all of the robots and all of our test devices right here in our New York City office. We might
I
expand
send
in the
it to
future.
you. That makes so much more sense. That's
Yes.
operationally duh, I get it.
Mhm. And so that means that we're taking the burden off of the software engineering teams, our customers. They don't need to worry about maintaining a robot, making enough space for it, keeping devices up to date in their device farm. Mobot does all of that. And we're essentially offering testing as a service and longer term testing infrastructure as a service. And so what this looks like is, let's say you're an iOS engineer and you've built an app. You probably also have some test cases that you've recorded of just what you want the robot to do. You would basically take your phone and you'd manually sort of go through one time the test flow that you'd like our robot to automate. Let's say you're going to tap on the screen, you're going to fill in your username, you're going to fill in your password, you're going to tap sign in, and you're going to enter your credit card details. And that's the test. You're going to record that on your phone, and then you're going to upload that into Mobot. Once you upload that into Mobot, we are going to take that video recording and we're going to translate it into robot instructions for the robot to understand. And so that does mean XY coordinates. We're creating screenshots. We will actually program the robots for you as a part of our service offering. And then these tests are now going to be able to run over and over again. We can then scale this to a number of different devices. If you want to test on a small iPhone SE running iOS 14, all the way up to the latest and greatest iPhone 14 Pro Max that's running the latest version of iOS 16. There might be a new version of iOS 17 coming out soon. On the Android side as well, an older Android 6 phone. Or you might want to run on a Samsung S10 running Android 10. Or you might want to run on the new Google Pixel 7 that's running Android 13. Or maybe there's an Android 14 developer beta. And so you're basically going to record what you want the robot to do, send it over to us, and then Mobot oversees the test execution, the maintenance of the tests. We have the robots in our office doing the work on as many robots as we need to get the work done. And then we deliver back to you a report that you can access in our web portal that will show you a screenshot by screenshot replay of, okay, this was what was seen at step 1, step 2, step 3. You get a screenshot. So you sort of see like a replay step by step of everything that the robot executed corresponding with timestamps. And then as well, you get device logs. So if something crashed or there was an error, you can actually see under the hood what were the error messages that were generated by the device.
Wow.
And so this provides just more rigor than your traditional kind of manual test where someone did it, but you're not really sure if they actually did it, or how did I get the bug again? And you have to go all the way back. And when you file the bug ticket, you're spending minutes, hours trying to reproduce stuff. That's the time and the opportunity that we're really solving here.
Yeah.
And how big are the robots?
Yeah, so our robots basically fit on a table. And so in our office, we have shelves that we're setting up where we are able to basically stack robots on top of each other and position them side by side. So you can imagine we have a number of different robots that have different devices that are mounted to them. And so strategically, as a part of our operations team, we're figuring out the most efficient way to kind of batch the tests and queue the tests up so that they can be executed in a timely manner after we get new builds from our customers. And so our customers are distributing usually pre-production builds to us via Test Flight, Firebase, Google Play Beta, App Center, and essentially we need to be able to download that mobile app onto our test device. And so this is the beauty of why we can do this testing service in the cloud is we have the test devices in New York. The customer can be in, Australia or Southeast Asia or Europe, and they just have to be able to send the app to us in the cloud, and we can download it. We can run the test, and then we send them the report, and they can view the reports, in our interface. And so that provides you with more detail and more rigor than you're going to get with just manual testing. And we're saving them time because now instead of needing to do the manual tapping yourself, you just need to go in and read the report and then drill straight into, oh, okay, there was a bug at this particular step. A bug ticket was automatically opened in Jira or in Linear or Shortcut. And now the engineering team can go straight to that report. It shows you the steps to reproduce. It shows you the logs. It shows you the timestamps.
And it's interesting that you brought up the cloud because this got me thinking, a couple months ago, we had an entire segment here on dojolive with AWS, with Art Chan. It was a great segment. And we talked just a lot about the benefits of cloud in and of itself. But what I see is happening is it's sort of like this cloud services, but for manual QA testing, because what happens here is the scalability that I'm seeing that you're offering with your service. Like I can grow my devices or shrink them back without having to actually worry about that infrastructure myself, right? I'm not having to invest in the newest iPhone or all of these things and have this huge inventory of devices that I may or may not have to use, or something that's no longer applicable to me. What am I going to do with it? How do I recycle it or whatever? So I think in terms of infrastructure, also, this is like super smart in how not just time, but really even money and perhaps and even an ecological like implication of what this means for everyone not having to have so many devices on hand.
That's right. I think ultimately our role is to make it easier for engineers to be able to build products efficiently and quickly and with less headaches. And so that does mean, not needing to physically manage the devices, being able to just like know that I can just record on my phone and a robot can take over from there. And I think that is part of what we're trying to build here is this no-code robot programming tool where anyone can around the world can just pull up their phone, record the intention of what they want the robot to do, and the robot can then just replicate that and move forward. And so, of course, as a startup, there's a lot of different moving pieces to make it all work, and it's quite an operationally complex business. But I think long-term, like that's our North Star, is it's not actually about only mobile apps, right? We think this is an opportunity to help make it easier for engineers in building self-driving cars, building your point of sale kiosk at your coffee shop, your grocery store checkout.
Medical devices.
Yeah, healthcare devices.
Yes.
Yeah.
IoT devices, all sorts of devices, your smart refrigerator, basically any device that's being used by a human in the real world. That's what we want Mobot to be able to test. But we're starting with iOS and Android because that's the real near-term opportunity. And I think that's where there's the most complexity right now with physical testing.
And the biggest reach. I mean, everyone pretty much has a smartphone. Not everyone has a smart fridge, right? So it makes a lot of sense, I think, from the business perspective. This leads me to something going back earlier to the very beginning of our show, it being International Women's Day. And not particularly about the female or woman's component here, but I want to go back to this idea of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and what that means for devices as well. I'm curious if you have this and you're, probably way far off, but in that the map of including things like people who might not have fingers. I mean, are your robots going to be able to simulate what it would be like to utilize this device with, I don't know, the elements that we use on our mouths, or perhaps those who are colorblind, or whatever this might imply? Is that something that you've got on your roadmap for that as well in your devices?
Fundamentally, we're trying to build a platform where robots and automation are mimicking what humans do to interact with products. And so we already do actually a lot of testing around accessibility. We have customers that want to basically switch between light mode and dark mode on a device. Or yes, there are settings for that make an app more colorblind friendly. There's also, changing the text size. Like if you have the robot go into the device settings menu, crank it down to the smallest text size, open the app again, make sure everything looks correct. Then background the app, go back to the menu and crank it all the way up to the biggest text size. Is stuff overflowing? Can you actually still see all the buttons on the page? If you toggle with different settings, if you flip between portrait and landscape, if we're switching from different languages, from English to Spanish to French to Chinese, are different character sets supported for different, different Unicodes, all of that. And then also as well, right to left, certain languages like Arabic or Hebrew, the world is different. The way that UIs work in different parts of the world is different. And so that's a really important part of testing. And so fundamentally, what Mobot is here to do is we have a certain set of recommendations that we certainly would encourage engineering teams to, when they are thinking about testing, you should also be inclusive in your testing. Absolutely. And you should also be looking at your analytics. For example, if you know that your app is predominantly being used by older members of the population, so they might have bigger phones, bigger screens, or if it's
older phones.
Yes, older phones as well. For example, if it's a teenager that's getting hand-me-downs because it's a gaming app, so you do need older phones because historically they may not have, they might not get the latest and greatest phone with their allowance. And so designing for the end user, and every team is going to have different requirements. Mobot is here to provide sort of a comprehensive set of data and devices so that we can support all of those different use cases.
That's fantastic. I love it. So we're actually here at the final minutes of our show today. If you can believe it or not, this has gone by really quick. I love what you and Mobot are doing. It's very timely, extremely forward thinking, and necessary. But I want to talk about you, Eden, as a leader and the company that you're building in terms of its people. What has this journey been like for you? What might be some words of wisdom that you might have for other individuals who've gone down this entrepreneurial path? And, you mentioned, being a startup, I think a 45-person team. How have you established what you're building out and got all these amazing people on board with you? Talk to that a little bit.
Yeah. So I have never built a company of this size before, right? I've never been a CEO of a Series A stage startup. And fundamentally, when I was first starting the company, I had never started a company like this before, and I didn't know how to do sales. I built the first prototype and put together the first version of Mobot, but I didn't know how to do that either. And so I think an important thing, and we try to always message this across the company, is anyone can have a great idea. It doesn't matter if you just joined the company a month ago or you're a really senior leader who's been here for years. I want to create the sort of meritocratic environment that, I wish I could get to work at too, where I might be a junior person. I might have a lot of great ideas, but if you are willing to put together a good case, I don't think it's enough to just like, oh, I have a great idea here. I just threw it out there, and you expect that someone else is going to do it for you. That's also not how this works, right? I think the core thing to being successful is you have to have an idea, you have to have the vision for it, but you also need to have the execution. And so I think one thing that I really want to continue to promote at Mobot is that if you have a good idea and you're willing to have the resilience and the advocacy and you're willing to push it through, we will believe in you, we will support you, and we will allow you to try that idea out. Because I do think experimentation, iteration, and being agile and responsive, especially in this macroeconomic climate, especially having gone through a pandemic, that is more important than ever. And so creating opportunities regardless of your background. I'm a college dropout. I didn't know that much about robots. I studied mechanical engineering a little bit in college. Like, that should not block anyone from having a good idea in a business. But I do think it's about having an informed perspective. Before you go around proposing ideas, you should make sure you actually gathered all the data and the feedback in order to propose your solution. But I want to create a workplace where that is possible and that anyone from any team can provide feedback and provide new opportunities.
I want to say the sense of fearlessness is what I hear in you, but I don't know if that's exactly right either, because I do think there's a sense of fear. It's more about being courageous to work through it, right? I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to do it anyway. And I think that takes a lot of courage, a lot of bravery. And I think that's fantastic. And I mean, in my life lessons here, it's easy to think that those people who are brave aren't afraid. But I really do believe the older that I get, that fear is actually the first where bravery starts, right? You can't be brave if you're not first afraid. But then being smart about it, like you're saying, not reckless, right? I love it.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Eden, for spending your valuable time with us today, for sharing all about what you and Mobot and your team are up to. We wish you nothing but success in this 2023 and beyond. And I have no doubt that that's actually where you're headed, because like I said, I can see all types of applications in the future is wide open, as you're saying. This need to be device dependent across fragmenting hardware, because that's the truth. It's not going anywhere. It's probably only going to get more and more complicated. So thank you once again. Stick around as we go off air in just a moment. But before we do, we would like to remind you that we have our recap show every Monday at 10 o'clock Pacific, where we're going to be talking about Eden's show, as well as yesterday's show with James Layfield of ClearFind. And we'll give you our feedback, our takeaways there, some tidbits, and introduce next week's shows as well. All right. So thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your week, and continue to learn from the women who've come before us, the women who are with us now, of course, to set a better path for those of us, females and women, and that journey of equity and equality for the future as well. Everyone, have a great day. Bye for now.